간다. 감사합니다.
Dead by Daylight is an amazing game in a way that the people that spend hours and hours playing the game fucking hate it. But we can't quit because deep down, we know that there's nothing else that can compare to it. Not in terms of genre, but in terms of the specific feeling of satisfaction of hearing the gens pop and the gates power up. The terror of seeing your teammate go down and seeing Devour Hope or No One Escapes Death pop up in the corner with that little music sting that we all know and love. The nirvana that is reached when the axe hits a survivor from so far away, which is actually a rare feeling because we all can't be spooky loops.
Talking about?
The bloodlust that fills you when you're chasing a survivor and you're gaining on them. The satisfaction of survivors fucking up their match by all of them being injured and in one place. And that place is the killer shack. There's also the feeling of defeat after being unhooked in front of the killer and realizing that the teammate that unhooked you left their borrowed time at home. I'm fine. But in all seriousness, Dead by Daylight is great. For the uninformed, Dead by Daylight is a 4v1 online survival horror game where players can take two very different roles. Role A is Survivors, where you team up with 3 other players to work together to complete gens and avoid the killer in a bid to successfully escape the trial. Role B is Killer, where you can control one of the many killers featured in the game to hinder the survivors in their progress. While the survivors are basically interchangeable, so it really doesn't matter who you pick, the killers all have their own unique abilities that help them torment the survivors. One is able to place marks on the ground that allows her to teleport when a survivor steps on it, another is able to reenact the birds, and another can puke. She's my favorite. Of course, all of the unbridled chaos featured in many clips, videos, fan-ons, and streams can overshadow the in-depth lore that is going on in the game and with the characters. At first glance, this can just seem like a game about random people being hunted by random killers. But it's not. There's one character who is reinvigorated with a sense of survival because they've been put in a situation where people will actually listen to what they have to say. They're not overlooked anymore. Another character becomes an investigative journalist after investigating the xenophobic and racist assault on their father. Another was orphaned and left to survive in the woods after their mother was killed by an animal. Another is a disgruntled Irish immigrant who had their invention stolen and was betrayed by someone they thought they could trust. And another is a treasure hunter searching for answers concerning their parents' disappearance so long ago. All of these characters come from different points in time and often different universes from each other. Some survivors have no actual connection to the killers they debut with, others have interacted with them once, and others are so connected to their killer that being in the original world any longer would have ruined everything they worked for just for being associated with them. That's not even getting into the entity, which is a being that takes all of these people from their respective universes and timelines and puts them in these faux versions of the places they know with the intent of consuming their hope and despair like its name is Junko and Ashima. Repeatedly having them kill or be killed until the entity can no longer feast on their hope or despair and chucks them away, not to where they came from, but to be forever lost in a void like throwing away a chewed Capri Sun straw. Like, I have recently started to believe that the entity is actually the Nameless Miss. Where was I? Oh yeah, clan sorting. Let's start with the survivors.
Don't mind me, just a submissive and breedable gamer boy ready to be killed in a ritual or sacrifice. Oh shit, they're here.
I believe Dwight is a venturer. I think at first he would be at ghoul status for some time before actually being embraced. Then he would just be some higher ranking venturer's little worker bee, all the while trying to prove himself as someone who deserves a higher place in kindred society. He would definitely prove himself though. As time ticks on, he'll get so much better at getting rid of the competition to the point where I think he might even be good enough to get rid of his sire.
Just acting like they wanna know me. Are they in the phony? Try to check me, it's a warning.
Let's go!
Okay, so Meg is basically that character archetype where they're a directionless troublemaker that needed some coach to show them a proper way to relieve their anger. I can see Meg getting embraced by an Anarch Bruja and maybe spending some years running around with them. Maybe having a chance encounter with a Camarilla Bruja who might convince her to change her allegiance, and she probably would. She would be along the lines of a Scourge or Sheriff, not really in those positions since she wouldn't really be a leader type, but more along the lines of someone closely with them and does jobs for them inside. Like a member of their team, basically.
I gotta put me first. I gotta put me first. I gotta put me first.
I originally was going to make Claudette a Salubri and then a Gangrel, and then I actually like the idea of her being a Hecata. Though I can also see her as a Tremere too. I think it's mostly because she doesn't really have that perfectionist vibe that I ultimately went with Hecata. It's just that I can see someone from the clan being interested in Claudette and embrace her. It would come off more like a post-Entity's Realm recruitment where she's a bit more interested in some supernatural elements to botany and how it meshes with the human body. I don't see her as a mad perfectionist alchemist like a Tremere, as much as I see her becoming someone with a slight curiosity with death in different forms. I can just see her interest in botany becoming an interest in necromancy. There's a pipeline somewhere and she's on it.
And you wonder why you came, where did I go wrong?
So maybe at first he won't raise the interest of a lot of Gangrel because of his status, but whenever he decides to go live in the woods, he's gonna run into something he thinks is a big ass wolf, and then the next night he'll be a Gangrel. I think he'll be perfectly fine with it though. I feel like a part of him will be down for scaring the life out of his dad just as some form of revenge.
Good news! The person that sent you this has escaped containment!
Nia is definitely a Bruja. She's honestly like Meg, only if Meg never had any type of direction in her life. Nia is just a giant ball of recklessness and rebelry, doing anything and everything that's considered acting out and sticking it to the man. Not for no reason, mind you, but again, the main difference between the two is an outlet that doesn't end with a record. I can see her being a wild Bruja, especially during her fledgling years where it seems she's much more susceptible to getting roped up in the plans of way more experienced and charismatic Brujas that are leading whatever new charge. Maybe she'd get roped up in a mass embrace, who knows.
I've got a partner in many crimes. I'm gonna ask him to help, okay? Hey, Michael!
I see Lori as a Salubri whose bane is bad. And when I say bad, I mean, damn girl, you live like this? No, but seriously, whenever Lori is in a picture, you can be sure she's gonna be hunted by Michael. She's kind of like a distant relative to Sidney Prescott in that sense, because in every incarnation, she comes back more ready than before. Especially when you take in the movies, she's very hardened and has already showcased that she makes teaching her daughter and granddaughter a priority so they can be safe if she has an encounter with Michael she doesn't come out of. Just looking at the Salubri from a very basic perspective, and yeah, you see how Laurie Strode fits the bill.
Caution! Do not open! Danger! Oh, Scoob, I'm dying to know what's inside.
With a clan that's known for constantly testing their luck and Ace having a gambling addiction, these two are a match made in heaven. Or hell. Or the realm. Which is basically hell depending on who you ask. Actually, a lot of the killers hate this too, so yeah, hell. In the midst of him running from place to place to avoid the debt collectors while also owing debt to new people, I can see him meeting his sire and them finding Ace's lucky streak really interesting. Like, surprise! Even if the debt doesn't follow you, the doom will.
It's not every day that I'm sad, but it's most of them.
That's not funny.
I know.
Okay, maybe some folks might be a little hesitant to call Fang a Tremere, but I think she fits the bill based off the compulsion for perfection alone. I just want to say that I vibe with the Tremere so I can talk as much shit as I want. The Tremere have a strong tendency to screw themselves up in the long run with their intense drive for perfection. And the same goes for Fang, who wanted to be the perfect esports competitor and in the process did more damage to herself than intended. That's why self-care is important, kids. Remember that. I can say that the fall she has and how she reacted to it definitely disqualifies any chance of her being a La Sombra, especially since she brought the calamity onto herself. In the realm, kind of like Ace, she sees this as an opportunity to get herself together and prove that she's cracked at surviving. That's what the kids say, right? Cracked. This is another obvious one. David is a modern Bruja in its most basic or stereotypical form. Not really in a fight the power type of way, but more of a directionless wrecking ball type of way. Whereas Jake was more against using his family's wealth and following what they, specifically his dad, wanted, David was more than happy cruising on his family wealth so long as he got to live his best life, which consists of, let me check my notes, fighting, romantic walks on the beach, and fighting. That doesn't seem right. Hang on, let me consult the wiki. Yeah, nope, that's actually right. David really is just living his best life by punching people.
Freshly squeezed.
Billy.
In a car.
Billy, stop.
I see Kate as a gangrel mainly due to how she's connected to her community and her love of traveling. In my opinion, the most admirable thing about the gangrel is just how much they put into being a family or a community with their chosen pack. This pairing is just too perfect for words. Her perks spell the type of person that can face danger by roaring back in its face. I mean, they might not work the way I want them to, but boil over has worked for me 2 out of 45 times, so I'm gonna keep using it.
But if you close your emotional damage.
I'm mostly going from his lore in the game because I could care less about referring to the reboot because I fucking hate it. But Quentin's okay because I love his perks. I'm not going to say a lot of celebrity, but it can be common for some to view their unlife as nothing but a curse. I feel like Quentin would fall under this as well as falling under the Hunted Bane, just off the basis of him and the other kids of that unfortunate Badham preschool era who ended up being targeted by Freddy. From his perks and how the game describes him, he's definitely a celebrity. There's no doubting that. When it comes to the most altruistic of the survivors, he takes the cake. There's not a single selfish bone in his body. Wait, except for when I play him. I think it's cute that Adam has a very reserved personality for someone with a perk like Deliverance, but that is the case with DBD's resident rock thrower. Adam immediately reminds me of Beckett. They both have this air of sophistication with their demeanor and their work, while they also enjoy folklore and stories and researching those folklores and stories. Kind of like other gangrel, Adam would also have the drive to keep going, regardless of whatever hardship is being placed in front of him. In his regular life, it was more along the lines of him silently struggling and then silently overcoming those struggles, but in the realm, we would get more of that traditional gangrel, leading the charge and fucking people up. Again, back to his perks. He definitely falls into the category of vampire doggies that are not really social, but can handle his own.
You just walk around all day thinking about other people's feelings?
Yeah, don't you?
No. How do you get anything done?
It's hard.
So at first I was like, maybe a Toreador is a little too simple? But then sometimes the simplest answer is often the right one. There's nothing that can be done. Such is the case with Best Boy Jeff being a Toreador. And this is mostly off of his lore rather than his perks, because his perks give off a more celebrity vibe, maybe. But I think I'm more comfortable saying Toreador for Jeff. I actually don't see him being one of the obnoxious ones, at least not yet. I can see him being one of the fledglings that sees this as a curse more than a gift. He's one of those Toreadors that now exist because someone was very fond of their work and he had to pay the price for it, before being left on the side of the road to figure shit out himself. Poor guy. Though based on his lore, I feel like he would be into it at some point because he's always been isolated, and even though it's because he's shy, I think he's just more comfortable now. So he would still have this drive to create art and maybe would have a lot of others invested in what he creates. He would also be a Toreador who's very good with animals because he would not want to have to give his good boy up. Oh fuck, it hurts. Let me tell you, I have a episode of Unusual Suspects, which is a show I have never watched before, playing in the background, and it's on mute, but it looks intense. I'm trying to find out who murdered this couple, and now there's cheating plot. There's a plot of them like renting out froppy ass homes. Froppy assholes? What? I meant to say froppy, but then I also meant to say flumpy, and then that is just the word that came out. I I think Janie would be a Toreador. In my opinion, she's your typical tragic artist. She puts a lot into making herself appear like an Oprah. Someone the masses can talk to about their deep-seated issues, but also someone the masses can adore, much like they adored her mother, who was an actress. While I don't think personality-wise Jane is manipulative, I do think she would end up being one of those Toreadors that enact the myth of the Toreador being the most humane of the kindred in order to better lure people in. Jane would definitely give off that beautiful in the face of sorrow vibe that would just woo so many humans into following her in a dark alley.
Gregory, quick, get in my stomach. This place is full of nerves.
Of course, while he may not have gotten his start this way, the moment Ash Williams and his friends read from the Necronomicon, they were all doomed. Ash being stuck in a doom status longer than his friends, forced to endure hardship after hardship, and then fucking reading from it again? What the fuck is wrong with you, dude? Regardless, he made sure his ass is doomed, and I think he would be a Ravnos. Not really in the most traditional sense, but in my heart, I feel Ravnos works the best. Obviously, the doom part is not all Ravnos sit around doing. There's also their troublemaker aspect of their clan, something I also think fits Ash perfectly, especially when it comes to his perks, because they're all about giving killers a hard time, especially flip-flop and buckle up.
That's not supposed to.
I know what's wrong with it. Ain't got no gas in it.
Yui Kimura is definitely another gang. She's one where it comes off as very easy to sort down, right to her breaking away from a societal prison being her traditional upbringing, and carving out a space for herself in the street racing scene. She's very much always gonna put up a fight too. Yui literally just checks off a lot of the boxes. There's not much to say about that. After being embraced and getting her footing, Yui is definitely gonna lead her own little pack where they ride bikes and drink blood.
I know something you don't. I know something you will never know.
I was a little bit wary about making Zarina a Nas just based on her being an investigative journalist, but I grew confident in the decision. She would make a great one and probably be the spy of either a high-ranking Nas or maybe be more along the sideline, becoming like a well-sought-after information broker as time went on.
I have a question for the god. Why?
Cheryl is another Salubri. Though if folks were to consider her along the lines of a gang girl, that's very valid too, because I think she fits both pretty nicely. Specifically, I went with Salubri because of the whole she works at a youth crisis center, which is like one of the best routes for a character like her. I feel like that's not praise enough. I can see her being chosen by a Salubri that maybe calls the hotline she works for while looking for a promising childer. I don't think she would be for it at first. It would definitely take some time, obviously, before Cheryl accepts her new fate, just given her history. She might like this better than being forced to birth gods, but who knows?
Where's the flavor? Where's the flavor in this?
Felix is definitely a Toreador. Even before he gets the chance to actually create what he wants, some Toreador would fawn over his visions and embrace him. Felix would probably spend his unlife wandering through random buildings he deems beautifully built, or walking through ones he thinks are really ugly and just criticize them 24/7 before being kicked out. His works would still be lauded, and I think with the extra oomph, he'd be way more hands-on. Like, a lot of the other kindred would come to him and ask him to help make their dream havens. He'd be renowned.
My mom said to me, you know, sweetheart, one day you should settle down and marry a rich man. And I said, Mom, I am a rich man.
Now, unlike Zarina, I'm very certain about this decision. Elodie would 100% be Nosferatu material. She most likely wouldn't be down at first, but I don't think it would be a Cleopatra situation. At least not too much so to where she would be miserable. I think once she realizes what can be done as a member of the Sewer Rats, her complaining would gradually go down, just because she does not come off as someone who puts their physical appearance above everything else, even if a transformation into an Nosferatu is pretty painful. I think she and Zarina would be on the same level too in terms of their renown.
Material girl. I want Chanel 9 boots. Saw this nigga steady jocking cause they know I'm the truth. Material girl.
So I feel like this is another easy one. Yunjin is a La Sombra. I'm not debating that with anybody. She would definitely be on someone's radar the moment she got into the semi-public light. Alessandra would probably spend some time watching her career and how she's always managing to bring out the absolute best in her clients. A fun crossover would be that when the executives start coming down on the trickster's performances and using him as a scapegoat, that would actually be a member of the La Sombra clan instigating that and only making it worse just to see how Yunjin would handle it. Even maybe manipulating Trickster into continuing his killing sprees to the point where Yunjin would be blamed for letting it happen for too long. I think she would end up being way more in the background with her work, but she would definitely start working her way up in the company with her new abilities. Either that, or she would start her own so she could do things completely her own way.
Nah, it's not funny. I've got school. Nah, I'm not laughing. I've got school.
So at first I was gonna put Nancy in the Banu Hakim, but after some deliberation, I think the Nosferatu fit her character better. I mainly went off her desire for justice and combating injustices, but something about her general demeanor doesn't let her vibe with the children of Hakim in my eyes. I'd like to pause for a moment and mention that when I talk about the Banu Hakim and justice, I'm really talking about justice in a vague form. Yeah, it might be obvious for some. I'm just covering my bases because I didn't really cover it in my intro video. Each Banu Hakim is different, and so is their idea of what justice means. So when I'm saying justice, just don't assume that I'm only referring to like Batman as justice and upholding the law or whatever. Okay? Okay. So Nancy's more along the lines of uncovering and showcasing how certain folks have been living foul. She's an investigator and may partner with someone who might have to do more of the physical heavy lifting. I do think she would find it more beneficial to be a member of a clan known for their investigative abilities.
I was home with my kids, bitch, I'm a mother! No drama!
In the wise words of a boiling man living out in an abandoned oil tanker, the Ventrue know how to get stuff done. While some people might not like to admit it, the Ventrue are kind of like that older sibling that had to grow up really fast in order to take care of their younger siblings. They know how to take control of a situation. Steve is definitely a Ventrue based off of his persona of being the babysitter of whatever the hell those little kids are called from Stranger Things. Like their group name. I was legit about to say the Losers Club, which they are, just in a different font. It's even in the playstyle of most people who play as Steve, to be the teammates constantly rescuing other survivors. I think for Steve, he would probably be a Camarilla Ventrue before maybe becoming either an Anarch or an Independent later on down the line. He would definitely have a loyal coterie hanging with him at all times though.
Oh, you look so cute sitting there doing absolutely fucking nothing, bitch! Get your ass up! Get your ass up!
Michaela essentially has the same vibes as Kate, and because of that, I expect the two to come across each other once they're both embraced. Where Kate has her music, Michaela has her witchcraft. I also think there would be a difference in how they move, mainly because Kate would be more of a wanderer, while Michaela is someone who would simply carve out a piece of land for herself and whatever community she has. This is especially considering her blessed totem perks. I can see her having a tight hold on an area, and a lot of kindred, mainly the ones that don't associate with the Camarilla, would come to her domain for boons and stuff. Get it? Boons? DBD boons, and boons being the currency of Vampire Society? Fuck you guys, that was so racist.
2 plus 2 equals 6. And let me tell you why it equals 6. Because look at this. There are 2 2s. So therefore there is an additional 2 that no one talks about because the government.
Jonah is a new survivor on the block, and with the way his lore and personality are written, he gives off Malkavian vibes. Not really in a typical sense in terms of this kooky oracle where his words and warnings are broken, but more along the lines of math is the work of evil, and only evil people can understand what the hell is happening in math. After his embrace, I can see him trying to communicate any visions he might have through ciphers and numbers in an attempt to approach them logically. But then realize that even if he is the mathematical type, he is no match for the Curse of Malkov. In terms of video games, he would be the character responsible for a lot of environmental lore, like random secret numbers on the walls in different areas. Jonah would give off some beautiful mind vibes, if you get what I'm saying.
Yes, so what if he's the devil, Rick? At least the devil has a job. At least he's active in the community.
Just like I mentioned earlier, each Banu Hakim member would be different, and especially when it concerns their individual idea of justice and the law. Such would be the case for the Trapper. The role of sheriff is very much in Trapper's future once he's embraced. Whether it's his sire or the prince of whatever city he's in, or even a city's baron, someone will see his capabilities of being able to rid them of their problem, especially if their problems are problems that need to be murdered. Because for the Trapper, justice is whatever his handler says it is. His loyalty to those he admires is his justice. Wronging them or making their life harder is the injustice in his eyes. Something along the lines of the sheriff from Bloodlines is what I'm envisioning.
Hello, motherfucker.
I feel like the Wraith would be along the lines of Tamika from Coteries of New York. And much like how I envisioned Michaela's Gangrel on Life, I kind of feel bad because in the world of darkness, I can see Wraith immigrating but ending up embraced while working at Auto Haven. I think in a weird twist of fate, while he would still end up killing his boss, I think he would stay at the shop and use the bodies as a means of feeding. But he would be very secretive about where his boss often went to. It would kind of be his own small carved out space where he would just feed off the bodies given by the mafia and anyone who might be looking into the area where they shouldn't be.
Not when I shift into maximum overdrive. Hi-ya!
This will be taking some very strong liberty. For those that don't know, the hillbilly is basically abused by his parents and locked away in a sealed up room for most of his life until he breaks out and kills them. So him being embraced is a little fuzzy on how that can happen, especially because anyone who wanders onto the Thompson farm is killed, so any bruja that magically wanders onto the farm would most likely end up killing Hillbilly in self-defense, so we're not going to focus on that aspect. But I do believe he is a bruja. If anything, I do see him ending up as a white that just lurks on the Thompson farm and the surrounding area until some other kindred or maybe some Second Inquisition get wind of his presence and take him out.
Christina, do you want some water?
Somebody sedate me!
I mostly base this off Clan Hecata's compulsion. While it's not really the same as straight up killing people that might be on death's door, I think Nurses fits in fine. Specifically, I'm thinking of her getting embraced by the Gorgon lineage of the Hecata. This mostly because they have a habit of embracing women that have committed murder or contemplated suicide, and given her mental state at the news of her husband's death, she definitely contemplated it more than once. And in terms of murder, a lot of people died that night. Like a lot of others, she would have been trained in combat after being embraced, and she might gain a strong interest in black magic afterwards as well.
Why you got that wig on? You don't look like Michael, you look like Mikael Myers.
Okay, hear me out. Michael Myers is a Toreador. It might sound a little weird, but he gives off Toreador vibes to me, just because of his tendency to become obsessed with one person, even across movies and timelines. Do I think he's anti-tribute? No, because Toreadors end up being weird regardless. Was that slander? Yes. Toreadors tend to make the perfect slasher, especially when you're thinking of the classic slasher in a mask that always ends up being able to catch up with the survivors they're chasing and maybe teleporting. Mikael Myers is a Toreador. He'd probably be independent just so he can wander and find someone to be obsessed over while he's searching for Salubri Lori, who's gone into hiding.
I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese.
Okay, listen. I know there's a lot of gangrels in DBD, but a lot of these characters, killers included, are just fighting for their lives in general. Some of them, again, killers included, did not come from happy lives. Such as the hag who, upon escaping from the cannibals, might actually run into a gangrel who maybe shelters in like this kinship type of way and it's just like, you're perfect, and then embraces her. She'll be pissed off about it at first, but then it'll be like, if the cannibals ever came looking for her, they'll have a harder time. I do think she would go back to her village once she's been nursed back to health, we'll say. I do think a lot of the others would pick up that she's not human anymore and they wouldn't just turn her away. I feel like feeding the local village gangrel would be a part of the village's new traditions.
Delirious girl, we gonna tell her the truth. She been lying all her life, it's time to give her the boot. Delirious girl!
Is the decision not obvious? You know what? Maybe it's not, because I can see some folks seeing him as a Malkavian, and while that's fair, it has more Samitsi vibes for me. It's just that as a human, he's mostly stuck with transforming and ruining people's mental states. He gets embraced in the Dragon Clan and finds out he can mold flesh. He's going to mold flesh. He's going to go ballistic, not only on people's minds, but their skin as well. This man is going to be a menace to both kind and kindred society. He cannot be allowed to exist. Yeah, I know kindred like him and worse already exist, but that doesn't mean we have to add to it. Okay, so maybe Huntress is a squint thing, but I stand by it. In her eyes, she's very much hunted because she has the red forest and people keep showing up, and obviously they have to be coming to get her out of the forest, right? I feel like Huntress being embraced is she's a little confused, but she got the spirit root. Like, maybe whoever sires her would basically want to show her how she's living foul, especially when they realize that Anna doesn't realize that she's essentially killing hikers and other types of travelers. I also think that they can see something noble in her desire to constantly take care of the little girls she orphans, but because she doesn't know how to take care of children, she's very bad at it. It's very much going to be a process of Anna's sire teaching her how to be human before how to be a kindred. I also think it's a 50-50 chance of her becoming a white, but I'm more confident in her ability than Hillbilly.
That's a child!
And that's an ugly, pimply bitch!
I don't give a shit about this version of Freddy Krueger, and pretending that it's the original will just make me disappointed in the fact that it's not when I open up Dead by Daylight. I will never forgive the reboot for doing a storyline where children were potentially lying about something children almost never lie about. I gave Quentin a pass because I like Quentin. But this bitch? No. None.
Gregory, wait. Are you telling me a shrimp fried this rice?
Okay. I feel some folks might see Bubba making masks out of human faces as a Samitsi thing, but I don't think so. I think it's a hobby. A fucked up hobby, but a hobby no less. I don't see it as being the same lifestyle as the dragons, if you get what I mean. I think Bubba would be much like Trapper, where his law and concepts of justice are very much dependent on his family, because it's kind of how it's always been with Leatherfaces, regardless of the name changes. Like the first Texas Chainsaw, Bubba is literally just defending his home from who he sees as intruders, because he literally doesn't know any better and hasn't been taught any better. That, and they kind of just waltz into his home, so you know what? Actually, fair enough.
Clown check.
I see fucking pieces.
Once again, I think Toreadors make great slashers, and I think the clown would be a Toreador. Is this about his tendency to cut people's fingers off when he mores them? Yes. Is his aesthetic preference. And what did I say before? Toreadors are all about the aesthetic. That includes fingers. Also, take into account he only likes attacking with his special gases. This chase, this murder shit, the music? It's all about the vibes for him. I stand by my choice.
Somebody real home. I'm taking her phone. I'm giving it back. They be really strong.
Okay, so at first I was like, Spirit is Banu Hakim, but then I remembered that one lore cutscene where she beats up all those dudes who were harassing her on her way home. And I knew. Going off this scene alone, I can see some random Bruja being nearby and seeing it happen. There's really no rhyme or reason when it comes to some Brujas and how they embrace new blood. Sometimes it can be random, like a drunk person deciding they're gonna blow up a chemical factory to declare their independence. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So that Bruja would follow Rin home, maybe get a glimpse of her home life and be like, I'm doing her a favor. Probably completely unaware that they just birthed the second coming of Kazan Yamaoka. I think Spirit would be fucking ruthless as a Bruja. Look at the power she has in death. People have DC'd once they realized she was in a match. People have created mythos that she was just so OP because they don't know how to handle her. This woman becomes a fucking monster when she's embraced. She's going down as a Bruja legend, trust me.
I ain't never seen two pretty best friends. It's always one of them gotta be ugly.
It makes the most sense that the killer group known as the Legion would be the Ministry. These guys are the equivalent of the Manson family. How the embracing would go is that Frank is definitely the first one to get into the conspiracies that the Ministry are peddling. He'd probably come across it on some forum or whatever. However, he would go through the whole process, but he would not grant the same thing to the others. He would just call them up to the resort, embrace them right then and there, because he wouldn't want the opportunity for them to be sired and controlled by anyone else, just him. Frank would legit start his own thing, and Julie would be his right hand. But Joey and Susie would essentially be stuck with them for a few years, and at some point, they would be presented with a choice to stay and leave. Whatever they choose is up in the air, but I like to think they'd leave.
I don't wanna be crying and puking and pissing and farting and shitting.
My wife, my darling, my beautiful cinnamon. Vami Mami is Banu Hakim. Just based on her lore and personality and her devotion to her gods, I think it's clear where her version of justice would stand. Whatever her gods, or in the case of DBD currently, her god wants from her, they will get from her. Is it easy to pretend to be her god and make her do some fucked up shit? Yeah, which is why she has no qualms about killing in the realm. She thinks the entity is her god. Regardless of what new changes happen, she'll assume it's a part of their plan and go on about her business. Her coming into contact with her future sire would be seen as her being rewarded for the sacrifices she's made. Now, she can't be infected with human sickness anymore. Of course, she would be devoted to the cause of the Banu Hakim once she becomes embraced by their clan. Kind of like Spirit, she would probably go down as a legend among them because of her tactics.
I ain't queer-coded, bitch. I'm bitch-coded, you queer.
Third time's the charm. Toreadors make good slashers. Such is the case with Zaddy. For many people who rock the Ghostface or Brandon James mask, they have a certain aesthetic they're trying to adhere to. Mainly the idea of putting on a snuff film, whether it's through public displays of gore, pictures, or even recordings. It's a performance made for attention. There is another killer on here just like that. I think when Danny starts up his murder sprees, he ends up being tracked by a Toreador who becomes enamored with his work. Obviously they're not tracking him to bring him down, but they end up embracing him. They keep him hidden until the heat dies down, and at some point they'll go their separate ways. So he keeps going, but he still keeps his murders very human-like and never really giving off any indication that anything but a human has done the murders. He takes to the Masquerade very easily, of course, and now he has more means to keep investigators off his trails. It's a long distance thing where his sire will keep up to date on the murders through news stories. So he saw his wife's body on the floor. Like, I want to chalk it up to, like, he was just tired because it's a graveyard shift and stuff. But, like, was this just a common thing in the house? Is this a common thing where she just sometimes will fall asleep on the floor? Like, the way she was positioned, I was like, you wouldn't have been like, hey, get up, go on to bed. But yeah, that's immediately suspect. Like, what the fuck? It's like you saw her on the floor and you didn't think nothing of it. I know the moment he said that, he was like, damn, I'm gonna be a suspect. He said, I came in, I saw she's not even like laying there like, oh, that's someone who definitely just fell asleep on the floor. She is slumped, bro. Like, and the blood, like the part that was visible is the blood on her back. Maybe it was dark because it was really early as shit. Like, I'm trying to chalk it up because it's obviously he's not gonna be it because he's the first one they presented, or is he? Because so far I'm getting that the show is basically like, the show is like, oh yeah, here's our possible suspects, but then here's our unusual suspects, and boom, title of the show. I'm a fucking genius.
Why would you think any of this was a good idea? Probably because I'm a dangerous sociopath with a long history of violence. Oh. I don't understand how you keep forgetting that.
The Oni follows his own creed so strongly, which makes him a fit candidate for the Banu Hakim. I feel like Kazan would be a child that would kill their sire, or at the very least go back to what he was doing just with vampiric abilities now. Considering I'm placing all these characters' embraces in the time periods they're from, whether or not this is a Masquerade breach can be up in the air, because even without adding in the World of Darkness stuff, monks did think that Kazan was possessed by something. That's how bad he was bugging across the country. Though a lot of kindred and other supernatural beings would probably still want him to be stopped, because he's doing a little too much. It's understandable, a little, but like, maybe take a chill pill. Deathslinger is definitely a Bruja. Based on his lore alone, he gives off Nines vibes, but as a Nines that comes off less noble, you know? He had to deal with a lot of shit because his family were Irish immigrants, but he was very technologically sound. But he was also very much a John Kramer, where he was making some pretty fucked up stuff. He's kind of one of those where I can see him in any path. I can see him running with the Sabbat, and specifically being a part of the Civil War where many of the Sabbat Bruja wanted to shake up the monotony of the leadership. I can also see him being the Prince's Scourge since he was a bounty hunter, and I don't really think he cared if the bounties were innocent or not. So he wouldn't really go for sheriff unless he could be a really messy one.
Being gay isn't your choice, it's mine. You're gay now.
You know, it's been ages since I've played against a Blight. Blight would be embracing the Tremere, just off the desire to biologically evolve alone. Like, his creed is legit, to understand the human condition, one must rise above it. If that's not a Tremere, then I don't know what is. In terms of allegiances, he would stay with the faction that lets him get away with the most. Maybe he changes teams when a sponsor decides to pull back their support. I don't think he would care so much about the politics happening around him so much as whether or not he gets to do what he wants.
Get your fucking dog, bitch! It don't bite. Yes, it do! Get the
Kind of like Lori, the biggest traits that the twins share with the Salubri is their clan bane of being hunted. There's also traits of hide, resist, and survive. I can see a Salubri maybe seeking them out upon hearing the news about the demon birthed by a witch. I feel like the twins would be seen as noble souls that were misunderstood and needed help. While this wouldn't stop them from being hunted, being able to use a lot of the abilities of the Salubri would most likely have them on the same level as Huntress, carving out a space for themselves in some part of the French countryside. I also don't see Charlotte allowing her sire to embrace Victor as much as she would just do it herself, just because she'll only see Victor as her responsibility.
I wanna be your friend forever. I wanna be a modern dancer. What a super weird thing to say that came out of nowhere.
We're going with the Toreadors again, folks. I'm sorry if you hate it, but it makes the most sense to me. Please try to convince me that some Toreador wouldn't be enthralled by him and his out there performances. They would make themselves so comfortable in his entourage or make him comfortable in their own group. Regardless, the entire vetting process would just be them going on and on about how he's being held back and his visions need to be seen to shake up the industry. Toreadors are known for their embraces being determined by whatever their current fixation is. I think Jiwoo would still be hurt about being left behind, because obviously, but I feel like he would get over it, because he sees his new unlife as a way to do more with his music productions. If you think he's unhinged now, imagine how much worse he'll be. He's so down for the Masquerade, he has no issues with it, because obviously, even if technically he falls in line with the typical Toreador anti-tribute, who would be more aligned with the Sabat, I feel like the resources and connections with the Camarilla would appeal to him more, especially in modern nights, because you have to remember, Ji-woon runs on attention and having his name in lights. That's not to paint the picture that there aren't Camarilla Toreadors who dabble in the things that Ji-woon does, because they do exist, but you get what I'm saying. I included him in Yoonjin's story since they were connected already before being taken by the entity, so I'll include her in his because for some reason I don't feel like he would part from her. There was a slither of trust between the two before she realized what he was doing, and they had their own unique bond. I like to think he'd embrace her at some point, or at least make her a ghoul. Something that bonded her to him and made sure that she would never tell folks about his bloody bops, and to make sure that she would never say anything about the Masquerade. Even though I feel like she wouldn't naturally because she's smarter than that.
I can't tell if this is a bit. Are you guys horny?
So, this was hard. At first, I was like, Ministry. Then I changed my mind. Then I was like, Samiti. Then I was having doubts. And now I'm back with the Toreadors again.
Again. How are you doing? A fucking again.
Let this be a lesson that there's no such thing as a wrong answer when it comes to sorting characters into clans. For this video, Elliot Spencer, aka Pinhead, will be a Toreador. This is mainly because of Elliot's hedonistic lifestyle before becoming a Cenobite, and the Cenobite's motifs in general. Like they say, demon to some, angel to others. Rather than finding the lament configuration, Elliot is embraced by a Toreador. I feel like he would still become Pinhead, like maybe he'd discard his birth name as he lived his hedonistic unlife. I think he would definitely be with the Sabat and be a Toreador anti-tribute, leading his own little entourage, who would be reminiscent of the other Cenobites in the franchise. Whether he would embrace them or just keep them as ghouls can be a preference thing for folks. You know, I'm kind of glad I did the licensed characters. This is fun. Gonna be a bitch to edit, but it's fun. Okay, guys, don't get mad. In my defense, come on. She's literally called the artist. And with a backstory like hers, she's getting embraced in Clan Toreador. Carmina would be an Anarch. Regardless if she's embraced by a Camarilla Toreador or embraced by an Anarch Toreador, she would run with the Anarchs. She wouldn't want anything to do with the system of the Camarilla. Like a lot of other Toreador killers in this video, her work would be found and her sire would be enthralled. They must meet her, and it's not like she's a hidden artist either. She's very much renowned. I feel like Carmina would also be attracted to her sire, not in the romantic way, but in the general person meets a Toreador for the first time way. This would be something like where they would bounce off each other during their first meeting, and by the time the next night rolls around, Carmina is a vampire. And boy will she be pissed about it. You look at this woman and tell me she wants immortality. This woman wants a nap. She's gonna pull an Edward Cullen. It's funny that I went from the little characters in part 1 and 2 of JoJo's to the smorgasbord of folks in DBD. Sorry this took so long to come out, but initially as I was writing, that's when Michaela was announced, and then not too long after that, the Portrait of a Murder was announced, and then it was just like, okay, let me wait and see if anyone else is coming. And now we know we won't have new characters until March, which is great. I have a cat that is desperate trying to climb onto my PC, and I spent a lot of money on it, so I have to go. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I can keep with my resolution of releasing videos closer together. I will have to practice figuring out some sort of short form content, because a lot of the videos I make end up being like 20 to 30 minutes, and editing them takes forever. But until then, I have been Miss Hexley, and I'll see you later.